Two, there we go. Why Southpaws dominating the sport of boxing. Let's go check it out.
Why do Southpaws dominate in the world of boxing?
Southpaws they've been blowing up.
It's a question that's intrigued fight fans for generations.
Davis,
Some say it's like having the cheat codes in a video game. As left-handed athletes, whether it's tennis, baseball, MMA or boxing, have a reputation for causing nightmares for their opponents. They possess that elusive X factor that sets them apart. Today, we're delving deep into the intriguing world of Southpaw domination in boxing. From the legendary champions of the past to the current contenders and champions making waves in the sport, we're going to uncover the secrets that give the Southpaws that extra edge in the squared circle, along with how to even fight them. So, let's explore what makes these fighters so unique and why they've left their mark in history and will continue to do so.
Pound-for-pound fighters ever existed.
So first up, what's the term Southpaw mean and why is it so important in boxing? If you ever want to put on a pair of boxing gloves or even learn how to fight and throw a few punches, you will notice to have some level of proficiency and balance, you'll need to adopt a stance. For the vast majority of people, you'll find yourself most comfortable
and this is the thing with like the whole boxing.
Leading your stance with your left hand and leg, placing your more dominant hand behind your lead hand. In this case,
have a good foundation, and then your punches will connect beautifully. You know, without that foundation, it's like building a house on a dirt road. You know, same thing like in boxing.
Case your right hand behind your left. This is called the orthodox stance for those that don't know. As you can probably guess, the southpaw stance in boxing has the same principles, but it's just the other way around. Instead of leading with the left side of your body, you lead with the right side of your body. And in most cases, you will usually pick the stance that feels most natural and comfortable to you.
All my my boxers in the chat, man. I hate sparring southpaws, man. It's like one of the worst feelings ever. Especially there's not many out there, so it's even harder to even get the practice for it. You know, like everybody's a right-hand fighter. Like I'm a right-hand fighter.
However, there has been a few famous cases where naturally right-handed fighters have purposely trained in the southpaw stance.
Like,
to gain
like right now, like I'm training like
likes of Alexander Usyk, Vasyl Lomachenko, and even marvelous Marvin Hagler himself.
Oh, yeah.
But what are those
that popularized right here.
advantages and how can they be used effectively?
One of my favorite old school boxers in the 80s.
Apart from the technical aspects of the sport, the most obvious problem if you come across a southpaw fighter is quite simply you probably wouldn't have had much experience in facing many southpaws.
Yeah.
For example, if you go down to the boxing gym, in most cases there's only a few you can actually practice with.
Yep, I just said that.
You're very limited in the experience in facing southpaw fighters. It's also estimated that only 10 to 12% of the whole population is left-handed, and obviously this can differ from country to country, but it gives you an example of why it is more uncommon to come across. And unlike in other sports, when you have a left-handed fighter face up against a right-handed fighter, nearly everything is flipped on its head. From the way you change direction.
You see, that's all Southpaws gotta do right here. I said this in many videos actually. They just gotta step outside of your stance, and that left hand will connect.
Attacking and defending, to the area where you place your lead foot, and even down to the selection of shots you choose to throw. For orthodox fighters, it's a different story. Angles of attack can sometimes be relatively more narrow or closed. Plus, orthodox fighters employ a standard guard more effectively against each other, and using the higher guard to protect against most punches. These fighters often tend to move out to their left so they can throw out the jab, but they may also defensively slip to their right to avoid opponents' jabs, and time to time even move to their right to get out of distance and reset themselves, or when looking to cut off the ring, which are all traditional movements from orthodox fighters. However, when a southpaw enters the picture, it's a different story. For example, when facing a southpaw and circling to your right side, if you're an orthodox fighter, it leads directly into the southpaw's left hand, which is usually his most dangerous
I remember my
punch.
first time sparring a southpaw, man. I kept walking into that big left, and it was like a strong hit. Like I'd never been hit like that before.
Because of this very reason.
Man,
so once again, it's another problem to overcome, and a habit that orthodox fighters have to consciously change in order to nullify the southpaw's advantage in the ring. But if you think about it, the orthodox fighter can do exactly what the southpaw is doing, but in a lot of cases they just haven't trained or fought against them enough. So that is why you see a lot of orthodox fighters make mistakes when they're up against the southpaw.
I've been noticing about that. Like a lot of fighters now are
as well as the notable
Southpaws
offensive advantages of the Southpaw, there are also some defensive strategies and tendencies that have made left-hand fighters just that more elusive and tricky to deal with. Most Southpaws seem to have the knack for cancelling out an orthodox fighter's backhand by their unorthodox direction of movement, especially with Southpaws that like to stay on the outside of the action. You'll often see them circling towards their right side, away from the opponent's right hand, and this makes it much more difficult for an orthodox fighter to pin them down and land any type of power shot with the right hand. Another strategy that is used defensively and offensively by Southpaw fighters is the battle for the jab, or lead hand. And because of the positioning on the lead foot and hand, you'll often see the orthodox and Southpaw jabs clashing during the fight. With both
that's what it is all day. It's like touching like gloves with the lead hand.
Fighters probing or pawing out their jab to establish the dominance, usually trying to get over the top of the other person's jab or even subtly distract them so they're able to set up the backhand. And this is almost an everyday occurrence for Southpaw fighters. For orthodox fighters, impaired vision sometimes caused by the Southpaw's right hand and the constant battle of footwork to try establish some kind of rhythm with the jab can not only prove exhausting both physically and mentally, but it can also be frustrating for an orthodox fighter. Couple that with someone who is difficult to land a clean shot on, and it can really be a nightmare experience for a lot of right-handed fighters who are not used to fighting Southpaws or the movements and tactics they should employ.
So awkward fighting Southpaws, man. Sparring them.
As mentioned previously, the success of left-handed athletes isn't only unique in boxing, nor has it only been prevalent in recent times. The advantage of
I don't get the science of being left-handed.
Left-hander can be traced back centuries ago, even as far back as gladiators who fought in the Colosseum. In Roman society, those who were left-handed were often considered unlucky or untrustworthy. However, left-handed gladiators were considered to be more special than those that were right-handed. During the battles, the left-handed participants were considered to be a notable part of the show, as they would use varied weapons and have a more exotic fighting style. But even if you're a skeptic in historical data, there's been recent scientific studies that reaffirm the point that left-handed athletes have certain advantages over right-handed athletes. Researchers studied the data on the careers of 10,000 professional boxers and mixed martial artists. They found that left-handed males and females had a greater chance of winning fights due to their surprise effect. Another study from the University of Manchester found when lefties fought a righty, around 54% of the time the left-handed fighter would win. It's also been proven that there's over-representation of left-handed fighters within boxing. As many as 17.3% of male boxers were left-handed, much higher than the typical 10 to 12% of the males in the general population. This further backs up the point that because there's such an advantage for left-handed fighters in the ring, some natural right-handed fighters will adopt the southpaw stance, even though it may be less comfortable or natural for them. I'm sure if you've boxed at some point, you've turned southpaw to get a positional advantage or even create some hesitation in your opponent. Hey, even I've done it at some points as an orthodox fighter. And looking at the numbers, well, they don't lie.
Yeah, once you establish that southpaw stance as a right-handed fighter, there's so many things you can do, man. Like, as long as you know what you're doing, so many things you can do.
The success of the southpaw in boxing spans decades and even centuries. While we have probably more modern day greats who have really cemented themselves in boxing folklore in many ways and created that mystic and glamour around the southpaw stance that we see in boxing to this day. One being Marvelous Marvin Hagler, who reigned as the undisputed middleweight champion from 1980 to 1987, and was probably one of the most fearsome, ruthless southpaws we've seen in recent times. And one of the most accomplished boxers to ever grace the sport is 8th Division World Champion Manny Pacquiao, who is an absolute nightmare for his opponents, not only because of his incredible speed, footwork and movement, but also because he followed that southpaw stance. Then of course you've got the brilliant, dazzling technique, elusiveness and combination punching of Joe Calzaghe, Nassim Hamed and Pernell Whitaker, many associating the southpaw style to them in modern times. All those southpaws went on to have fantastic careers. For Joe Calzaghe's case, no one ever truly figured out his awkward southpaw style, and he retired undefeated with a 46-0 record. Even today, we're seeing the success and prominence of southpaw boxers. Most of these lefties have tried to emulate their skill set and style for the likes of Calzaghe, Whitaker, Pacquiao and Hagler. Most recently, we've seen fighters such as Terence Crawford, Gervonta Tank Davis, Shakur Stevenson, Alexander Usyk, Vasyl Lomachenko all go on to achieve great things within the sport so far, and you would say at least most of those names I've just mentioned are in the pound for pound top 10. And don't be surprised if new southpaws start to get on this list.
Yo, Jaren Boots is so nasty, bro. Oh my god. Hold on, bro.
If new southpaws
just look at that.
Start to get on this
gets out, looks away,
list over the coming years.
Out.
If you look at Alexander Usyk and Terence Crawford,
you guys should watch the journey.
You could safely say that in any era, they would cause some of the greats of the past massive problems with their style and their southpaw stance. And as of when this video was made, Usyk, Crawford, Tank Davis, Shakur Stevenson, Vasyl Lomachenko all have a combined record of 126 victories and only 3 defeats, with 4 of those fighters still undefeated since I've made this video. And although these fighters are great in their own right in terms of their ability and skill, it's undeniable that the advantages of the southpaw stance still hold great reverence within boxing today.
Facing southpaws.
Now, as I've discussed, even though it appears southpaw fighters hold an advantage in the ring, there are ways to navigate and even counteract some of those advantages for orthodox fighters. The most important thing to do when facing a southpaw is to win that battle with the lead hand and foot position. In this instance, it would mean that your left foot should be on the outside of the southpaw's right foot. This will give you more balance defensively and will also give you a better chance of putting your backhand directly in the line of your opponent. You'll often see the feet of orthodox and southpaw fighters get tangled up or overlapping at times, as each fighter usually wants to get that outside position, as it's extremely important to do your best to win that outside foot position so you can set up your right hand down the middle. If you do manage to secure the outside position, then it opens up many opportunities for your main asset, the right hand. But the key here is not just about the foot position, but also about bearing your punches to both head and body, setting traps, and not being too predictable with your attacks. However, sometimes you may find yourself on the inside of the right foot during a fight, giving a direct attack down the centre line. And although this isn't ideal, you can still try things like pivoting anti-clockwise, getting out of range, or going on the attack to throw a short, sharp left hook on the inside. One of my favourite fights to watch from an orthodox versus southpaw perspective was Ward versus Chad Dawson. He did a tremendous job in nullifying the southpaw in Dawson, while also setting up his attacks effectively. Another fighter I recommend you study if you're an orthodox fighter trying to get the upper hand over a southpaw is Alexis Arguello, and for me, he's one of the best orthodox fighters to study against facing southpaws, as he defeated all 7 during his career. And that goes for southpaws too, to watch how an orthodox fighter can take advantage of you in those situations. And for those that are thinking of fighting in a southpaw stance, I recommend reading Bruce Lee's Jeet Kune Do, as this was even something Bruce Lee identified in his philosophy. He of course was a southpaw and a right-hander, but he also believed the strong side helped in quicker, unpredictable and more powerful attacks, while it plays into the hands of that centre line theory, where the concept of the centre line is an imaginary line running down the middle of the body. And Lee believed that controlling the centre line maximised offence and defence. This stance would allow you to protect your own centre line while attacking your opponents, for example, with the left straight down the middle. Not to mention, if your left hand is weaker, you really need to think about the technique when throwing a straight cross from that position, and sometimes making this much more devastating than if it was with your right hand. But overall, it just puts your opponent in an uncomfortable position, especially if they're not used to fighting a southpaw. And even southpaws themselves can be unsure when facing each other, as we saw Errol Spence struggle against Terence Crawford. Being able to fight in this stance gives you more adaptability in adapting to the opponent in front of you, whether that be a specific style, a strength, or weakness. It's just like Bruce Lee, be like water. But I'd like to stress, even though Bruce Lee fought out of a southpaw stance, you should always do that suits you individually, not just because you've seen your favourite boxer do it. But it's still great to know these principles.
So much hours to be like water, like jello.
Practicing these in your
So
training
much hours
so you can
just
understand how to
training.
handle it. Of course there are ways and techniques of dealing with southpaw fighters, but the fact remains most orthodox fighters dread facing southpaws, 9 out of 10 times for a good reason also. They're difficult to deal with, and they will usually be more comfortable facing off against you than you will against them, unless you're one of those guys that loves facing southpaws. But there's always just been something special about southpaws in various different styles we've seen over the years, whether that be their defensive mastery, to their natural attacking advantages, counter-punching, or ring IQ. Facing anyone who's a lefty has been a problem throughout history, and it seems no easier today. From champions like Marvin Hagler and Manny Pacquiao to the likes of Terence Crawford and Alexander Usyk and even Tank Davis today, the left-handed fighters have enjoyed a rich legacy within the squared circle, and their dominance can be directly attributed by not just the stance itself, but the often talented nature of these individuals, historical influence from past fighters and philosophies, even having the advantage of training against orthodox fighters all the time. And I'm sure the southpaw legacy will continue. I'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments. Are you a southpaw, and do you find yourself...
Yeah, that's the video.